the ones we typically remember the most, the ones that are life-changing, the ones that we could say, hey, I might not be where I'm at today without that person in my life, are the ones that first develop a relationship with us. We create a bond of trust, and then that allows that person to get me uncomfortable. If you try and push me into a state of discomfort, you don't even know me, you don't know my goals, you don't know my objectives, you don't know what I'm about, you don't even know what could be my order or my complexity, and yet here you are just tipping me everywhere. Yeah, you're probably a jerk. But here's what's interesting. We also don't remember the nice ones as well either. You know, everybody's had the nice boss, you know, oh yeah, they were great. Oh, they had great ethics, great values. You know, they treated me really, really well. They're very kind. They're typically not the ones where you would say, hey, that person was a life changer for me.
Welcome to the Transformative Leader Podcast, where we talk about what's holding you back from being and showing up as the transformative leader that you already are. This is Amir Ganad, your host and the author of The Transformative Leader. My mission is to put people in touch with their greatness so they fulfill their unique purpose in the world. On this podcast, we do that by giving you an abundance of actionable insight that you can put to good use immediately in your personal and professional life. I'm committed that every episode will leave you compelled to boldly declare, courageously pursue, and abundantly achieve the extraordinary.
My guest in this episode is Bill Ekstrom. He is the author of The Coaching Effect and founder and CEO of Excel Institute, ECSELL Institute, that is, which is the world's first and only organization to measure and quantify leadership effectiveness. He and his co-author, Sarah Worth, are considered the world's foremost authorities in metric-based performance coaching and growth. Bill is an expert in change management and discomfort, as made popular in his viral TEDx talk, Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. Bill and I talk about how leaders can make sure that the people within their organizations have just the right level of discomfort that will help them grow. Bill is also going to expound on a couple of points that he makes in his TEDx talk, as well as give us a kind of a peek behind the curtain, if you will, on the content of his book, The Coaching Effect. Bill, it is really a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Amir, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
The honor's mine. We have similar interests. Your passion for coaching and leadership and the great work that you're doing. I can't wait to dig into all of that with you. I'd love for you to start us off, though, by just telling us a bit about your background. How did you come to this point in your career?
Rather fortuitously, in a nutshell, perhaps in some ways similar to, but yet not too similar to what you and I were talking about before the show started, how you came about to have your own business. Something happens in our lives. In my instance, I got fired from a job. I, like you, I was on a good career path. Things were good. You know, I was an executive at a publicly traded company, and got called into the president's office one day, and he just said, hey, we're doing a whole reorganization and your job's gone. And I said, all right, so what's my next job? And he said, there is not one. And literally minutes later, I'm walking out of the office going home thinking, what's my next move? So while I think we all talk about how nice it would be, I shouldn't say we all, a lot of us, me certainly being one, saying, hey, someday I'm going to own my own business. Someday I'll be my own boss. Someday I'm going to start a company, and then we get caught up into our own lives and our journeys and the success we're having, and we never pursue those. So for me, it was getting fired, and had that day not happened back in 2008, you and I wouldn't likely be on the call today, Amir.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about these complexity triggers. It seems like you had one yourself, and we'll dig into that in just a few minutes as well, because I want you to talk about that. Yeah. So Bill, you've written a book called The Coaching Effect. And I'm really intrigued by the idea that you've managed to actually put some metrics against coaching and leadership. And I tell you, I'm really very interested in this because I've always had an interest in doing this kind of work. Now, having had an education as an engineer, of course, I have a kind of a need to measure things, but I've never really been able to quite say, okay, we're going to measure exactly how things turn out with coaching and leadership. I have my own indicators, but I'd love to get your perspective on this. So talk about that a bit.
Well, and thank you for bringing that up. I love to quantify things whenever I can. And I'm fortunate enough because arguably my greatest skill is my ability to identify and acquire talent. And our director of research is certainly no exception to that. When she can look me in the eye, and she's a very humble person, when she can look me in the eye and she said, Bill, if you can articulate what it is you want very clearly, I will find a way to measure it. And she happens to also be a sociologist, along with a master's in research methodology and various things. So we just set off on a journey to try and understand what everybody thinks are soft skills, but we all know and believe they contribute to success in terms of leadership and coaching. Now, I'm going to use the word coaching versus leadership, Amir, because what we studied are people that have teams that report to them.
Yep.
And so I like to use the term coach versus leader because I think I could be on a team, a great follower, and have great leadership behaviors.
Yeah. To
coach, though, denotes I have all that, plus I have a team of people that report to me. So, and now since then, we've been fortunate enough to study it across athletics and education and all different kinds of disciplines. But so we wanted to know what creates growth. And this ties back to my TED Talk as well. But so when we looked at what creates growth, we started looking hard about what people do and how they behave. So if we could figure out how to quantify that, that's where the measurement, that's where the metrics come in. And through a software program that we had developed and through researching tens of thousands of employee to boss interactions. Actually, we've got probably 150,000 of those measured by now, but then serving tens of thousands of people about their bosses. And that working dynamic is where we come up with our information. So sorry, long answer to a short question.
No, it's really great. It's very research-based, but you also have deep expertise relative to kind of the techniques and the approaches that you take to coaching. And now you talk about these growth rings, and I'd love for you to kind of explain what that's all about.
Well, the growth rings were introduced in my TED Talk, where we were on this journey to try and figure out. We found in our research that there was this discomfort component that great leaders, great coaches, when we would research our teams, there's a lot of things they did differently and uniquely. Now I'm talking about the great ones, not average, but the great ones. And this tension, this discomfort component kept coming up. So it was kind of like, how do you explain that to somebody? Well, there's a discomfort component, but why is that creating growth? Why was that one of the separators? And so we were working with a PhD in leadership, actually from the University of Nebraska. And I'll never forget, we were at a whiteboard and it just started to, after many hours and sessions together, it just all kind of flowed out, which is how we respond to circumstances creates an environment. And these environments either dictate our growth one way or another, either positively or negatively. And these environments we call chaos, which is no growth or no growth or negative growth environment. And you can imagine what chaos is. It's not having any understanding of inputs or outcomes. The opposite of chaos would be stagnation, which is a negative growth environment. And stagnation is having to follow too many steps or permissions and minutia. But then in the middle, in between stagnation and chaos, there's an environment called order, which is kind of what I was referring to earlier, how I was behaving when I was in the in the business world, as an employee. We get comfortable, and order is knowing that knowing what goes in and knowing what comes out, and it's very predictable, meaning that the inputs and outcomes are predictable. And it's predictability that creates comfort. Because it creates comfort, we don't ever want to change it. We don't want, even if we want to change it, we viscerally stay with it. And then next to that, this other growth ring would be called complexity. Complexity, not in the terms of what's complicated, but complex in the term of we don't know what's going to happen next. And anytime you change an input, Amir, an outcome's going to change. And it's the unknown. It is the unpredictability of what's going to happen is what creates discomfort. And it's really interesting because people are afraid to do things when they don't know what that outcome is going to be. So that's, again, that's it. There's a shorter version to it. I should say shorter version.
No, that's okay. We got time.
Yeah.
That's good. And so when it comes to this complexity, you alluded to sort of that complexity trigger that you also talk about in your TED Talk that caused you to go out there and start your business, which really has turned out to be something really great for you. Now, you talk also about two other kinds of complexity triggers. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So there's the complexity triggers. I think what you're referring to are that are forced on us.
Yeah.
I did not choose to get fired from my job. Mm-hmm. That was forced on me. So that, I didn't have any choice. I couldn't say, hey, to the president, hey, you know what? I decided not to be fired. You guys figure it out. I'm just going to go back and continue my work. Right. So there's one, so it can be forced upon us. And then whether or not we grow, if something like the pandemic is another example. That's something that's been forced upon us. We didn't have a choice. You can't say, I elect not to participate in this pandemic. It's here. It's upon us. So our growth then is dictated by how we respond to it. When I first got fired, I was in a state of chaos. I wasn't growing. I didn't know what to do or what not to do. I froze. And then eventually I was able to channel it into this complex environment to where I had to get comfortable with the unknown. But it forced me to do something differently. I didn't have any choice. I could not go back to work again in that environment. So it can be forced upon you. Another way is you can do it yourself. What's interesting about your perfect example, Amir, of triggering complexity yourself. You left a job after 19 years, correct?
Yeah, it was a total of like 31 years in the corporate world. 19 years with P&G, but then I had several years. So after 31 years, I left.
And you made that choice. So you triggered complexity yourself. So again, I could sit here and say, you and I wouldn't be on the phone together if you had decided not, if you hadn't triggered complexity, ventured into the unknown, got out of your comfort zone, we wouldn't be on the phone today. So that's complexity number 2, is triggering it yourself. And complexity trigger number 3, this is where coaching and leadership comes in, is knowing that by and large, people will stay in their own comfort zones. They will stay in their order, that there's a visceral response to venturing into these complex environments. We don't want to go there. That tells us then we need to be pushed into them. We need to be nudged out of our comfort zones. We need somebody like a coach who knows us well enough and cares about us enough that they know how to move me into a state that's going to create growth, because growth only occurs in a state of discomfort. And if I don't want to go into that state of discomfort, whether I'm in business, whether I'm in athletics, or whether I'm in education, I need help getting there.
Yeah, that's really a great point relative to this, making sure that people have enough discomfort that they're growing, but perhaps gauging that to make sure that it doesn't necessarily destroy them, right? I mean, so you talk about in your TED Talk, you talk about an example of your daughter kind of being, in that zone, and that the coach was sort of creating that situation where she was continuing to grow. What I find is in corporate environments or whatnot is that sometimes leaders, bosses, if you will, are just on one end of the spectrum or the other. Sometimes it's just like it's my way or the highway, and you're like uncomfortable as heck, and you're not really growing because you're in that state of chaos. And sometimes we're so nice to people. It's like, look, we don't want them to be uncomfortable, this and that. But the key, it seems, is to find that happy medium, right? Would you agree with that?
Yes, there is. So while if you listen to the TED Talk, you'll think that I'm giving order a bad rep, which I kind of do, because I have a love-hate relationship with it.
Yeah.
The title of it is, as a matter of fact, it's even titled "Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life." Mm-hmm. But the reality is, when we study high-performing teams, there is a sense of order in there. Meaning that I can't live my whole existence in a complex or uncomfortable environment, because there'll probably too much complexity tips you into chaos, just like too much order can tip you into stagnation. So there is a happy medium there. And what's interesting about what you said is usually one of the two extremes. Somebody's too nice, somebody's too tough. And usually the too tough we'll call jerks. I don't use that term. That's what we see in our research. My boss is a jerk. They're too nice. And the ones we typically remember the most, the ones that are life-changing, the ones that we could say, hey, I might not be where I'm at today without that person in my life, are the ones that first develop a relationship with us. We create a bond of trust, and then that allows that person to get me uncomfortable. If you try and push me into a state of discomfort, you don't even know me, you don't know my goals, you don't know my objectives, you don't know what I'm about, you don't even know what could be my order or my complexity, and yet here you are just tipping me everywhere. Yeah, you're probably a jerk. But here's what's interesting. We also don't remember the nice ones as well either. Everybody's had the nice boss, oh yeah, they were great. Oh, they had great ethics, great values. They treated me really, really well. They're very kind. They're typically not the ones where you would say, hey, that person was a life changer for me. Yeah. When you look at those people, you'll find the ones like I talk about in the book. When I talk about Mitch knew me like the back of his hand. I was like a little brother to him. I trusted him. He trusted me. But man, oh man, did he challenge everything I did in a wonderfully positive way to create growth. I remember him more than I remember the nice ones.
Yeah. When you have that right combination of compassion and courage, I think that makes a difference. In my book, The Transformative Leader, I talk about Chick-fil-A lemonade, which is a really wonderful lemonade. And lemon represents that courage to hold people to high standards. And the sugar represents your willingness and your true, genuine interest in helping them grow and make things happen and all of that.
That's a good analogy, Amir. Yes, well said.
Yeah. And thank you. And it really resonates with me that relationship and knowing the person, caring enough about the person to know them and communicating in a way that really puts the right level of discomfort there makes a difference. Because if you don't know the other person, I can think of these two guys, we'll call them Tom and Ben, who reported to me many years ago. One of them had this personality of just like, if I ever had to give him some negative feedback, I practically had to, throw the guy against the wall to get his attention, because he was just like, happy go lucky, everything was okay. And he never received that feedback unless I just really kind of shook him. And the other one was so sensitive that if I ever said anything about something he had done wrong, he'd turn red. I wouldn't see him for 3 days. And you know what? Knowing these guys helped me gauge the level of engagement or the type of engagement I want to have with them if I ever wanted to put a little discomfort into their world.
That's such a good point. And this almost comes full circle when you talk about measuring and metrics. So relationship, what you and I were just talking about, that's measurable. We can measure, and organizations today can measure the strength of the relationship between a boss and an employee, between a coach and somebody on their team, between a teacher and somebody in their classroom. That's a measurable. So that used to be thought of as a soft skill. Well, my ability to create trust-based relationships, right? No, that's not soft anymore. That's measurable. Because because you brought up a great point. What's so critical about that, because what you and I might do to create trust is different than Ben and Jerry. And you just described two different people. So it's not what we think what trust is. It's what I think and what Ben thinks and what Jerry thinks when they all are on the team that reports to you. Because your ability to create the same level of trust with Ben is going to be way different than how you do it with Jerry, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's important to measure. Because I don't measure it, I don't know what it is, and I don't know how to get better.
Yes. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the other things that I think about is that sometimes we have this sort of false dichotomy in our head, right? I can either be straight with you with my feedback and make you uncomfortable, or I can be respectful to you, or I can be kind to you. And the truth is, the best leaders out there have a balance of that lemon and the sugar, and they are courageous and they are compassionate and considerate. And by the way, compassionate enough to get to know the other person and figure out how to actually serve this feedback or that type of thing to them.
That is accurate. Very spot on. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So Bill, you talk about these 4 high payoff coaching activities. And I wonder if you could just share with us a little peek behind the curtain there.
Sure. So when we look at these high growth, high performing leaders, we look at what they do and how well they do it. And what we refer to that as coaching quantity and coaching quality. So what you're asking is, what are they doing differently in terms of their activities? And I'll share that with you, but then let's make sure and touch for as long as you want on how well they do it, because that's even more important than what they do. What they do is pretty simple. When we correlate whose teams are growing the most and what their leader does, what their coach does, there are a lot of things they do, but there are 4 things that have the strongest correlation to what we call discretionary effort, or increased motivation would be another way to say it. They do consistent one-on-one meetings. They do career development planning with the people on their team. They hold consistent team meetings, and they provide objective, not just subjective, but objective feedback. So while you're looking at me right now, and you're probably thinking, okay, gee, Bill, that's not rocket science. The challenge is this: how often? Meaning that, well, how often do I do my one-on-ones? How often do I hold my team meetings? How often should I provide that objective feedback to people on my teams? With whom? When we are researching leaders, we find that a lot of times leaders will spend 70% of their time with the bottom 30% of their performers. That's arguably even backwards than what it should be. So there's a lot of these factors that weigh in. So while it's not the activity that's unique, it's with whom, how often, and how well. So, for example, one-on-ones. Everybody thinks, well, I need to do my one-on-ones weekly. Well, guess what? When we study high performers, They do them every other week. They get no more discretionary effort out of doing a one-on-one weekly than they did every other week, except, by the way, with the exception being during the pandemic, when people had to go work from home. Those who moved the one-on-ones to weekly got better results. Team meetings is another example, Amir. People think, well, we should do our team meetings weekly. Guess what? Again, studying high-performing coaches, they did them monthly. They just did them differently than everyone else. So those are the activities.
Yeah. So your point is well taken in that there's not a particular recipe that you can say, okay, just go tick these boxes and everything is going to be okay. You got to think about the principle behind it, right? It's like, okay, so what am I doing? What is it that I really want to get out of this activity? And if in a certain situation or with a certain person, if that one-on-one is considered to be too much looking over their shoulder, then I may increase that frequency or decrease the frequency, if you will, or just kind of being really in tune with that situation. So you're using those tools in the right way.
Right. And you brought up a good example during a one-on-one meeting. So when we study people, when they do one-on-one meetings, the employee's biggest complaint about doing a one-on-one with their boss is all they want to talk about are the numbers. Okay. Well, guess what? A one-on-one meeting should be used to do all these quality things. Number one, it should be used to strengthen and further relationships. It should be used to challenge. It should be used to hold people accountable. It should be used to create healthy order. I mean, there's all kinds of things that should be done within a one-on-one. And this gets back to the quality component of coaching. If you tell a coach to, hey, boy, I read this book and I heard this podcast with Amir and his guest, and they said I should go do one-on-ones, more of them, every other week, and I'm not doing them at all now. Well, if I suck at doing those, Amir, that means I'm going to create even more, perhaps negative discretionary effort. I could be doing more harm than good if I'm doing them wrong. You wouldn't send a horrible salesperson out to see more people. They're just doing more damage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So, Bill, I want to go back to this measurement thing, right? Because you mentioned a couple of things that, hey, there are ways that you can measure relationships, and certainly, in my own practice over the years, I've come up with some really simple ways to measure kind of the dynamics within an organization. Like, how long does it take you? If you had to rate from 0 to 10, how much time and effort you put into speaking to someone just as soon as you recognize you need to talk to them. It's like 0 is like, I don't even think about it, I'll go talk to them immediately. 10 is like, I'd rather stick needles in my eyes, right? And so if you do that quick check in like 5 minutes flat, you can get a anonymous read, if you will, on what the level of comfort is for us to kind of give each other feedback. So things like that, but I know you have some of these as well. So can you talk to us a bit? So if somebody is listening to this podcast and says, yeah, I do want to go out and measure the effectiveness of our coaching or leadership. What else would you tell us? What other pointers would you give us?
Well, first of all, let me tell you what I won't do. And that's a 360.
Yeah. Okay.
Not a fan of those. It's if you want to know the impact you're having on a team, the only way, or let me rephrase it, the most accurate way you're ever going to know is to go survey the people on the team. People sometimes they hear that and they go, well, no, wait a minute. What about a 360? What about top down? Well, okay. So here's my comeback to that. If you want to measure how well you serve your clients, do you ask your client service people or do you ask your clients? Mm-hmm. You always ask the clients. Yes. Because if you ask somebody how well they're doing it, and we've tried this and the research just fails. If you ask somebody how they're treating somebody, or if you ask them for their own opinion, there's so often a gap between how I think I coach and my people being coached perceive.
Yeah.
And really what only thing that matters is what they perceive. I can tell you that I think I've got a great relationship, trust-based relationship with the people on my team. But then when my score comes back and I score a 72 on a scale of a 1 to 100, well, guess what? It's not as great as I thought it was. So I'm a big fan of bottom-up measurements when it comes to helping leaders understand how they coach. That's has proven to us to be the most accurate. And hopefully that was what you were looking for, or the question you were asking.
Yeah. So yeah, I think, I have to say that I've seen 360s done really kind of the wrong way when you sort of mix everything in and you get an aggregate number and it's not real clear what perspective has come. But I will also put this out there that says, for me, there are some tools out there that says, okay, I'm going to get the benefit of 360, but I'm going to compartmentalize. So in other words, I can take this report and tell you and kind of strip away what everybody else said. And I'm going to look at your direct reports. What did they say? So relative to your coaching abilities, I ought to look at that, right? That's what I'm hearing from you, right?
Yeah.
Or would you say
it is?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. But it's also asking the questions that understand that it's asking questions in a way, and this gets back to research methodology, which I don't understand as well as our people on our team do.
Yeah.
Are you asking questions about me though that impact growth? So I remember I reviewed somebody's 360 one time. They had a question on there that said, this person does a good job of balancing their short-term and long-term objectives. Well, okay, how do you answer that? I mean, seriously, should it be 50-50, 80-20, 20-80? What direction? And tell me how balancing long-term and short-term objectives leads to growth of my team.
Yes.
So you're asking a question that you can't correlate back to motivation or discretionary effort.
I'm totally with you. I think because if you really narrow it down to, look, we are really we are trying to measure this person's coaching ability, leadership ability, then you don't want to water down even the questions by positioning them so that everybody can answer and all that. You want to just really ask the question that you want to ask, right? I think that's really a good point.
And it has to be a question surrounding whether or not that person creates growth. And the only way they're going to create growth is through change, getting people out of their comfort zone. So yes.
Yeah. So if you were to give us a few more thoughts relative to just coaching, like as a coach yourself, a couple of kind of do's and don'ts, right? And I know that there's no magic pill. Is not it's not intended to be kind of a prescription. But what are some common mistakes that people make, and what are some practices that really work relative to being an effective coach?
So I'm going to go down two roads here. That's that's a great question. It's a very insightful question. I'm going to answer it in two ways. The number one is always, if you want your team, if you want to continue to sustain growth, create growth and sustain growth, first and foremost, focus on you and not your team. Meaning that we are all, anytime we have a team that report to us, we are, whether we're athletic, educational, or business, we are all lids to that team's performance, And if we want our team to grow, we need to grow our skills first, and we need to evolve our skills first. So I would tell you the first thing to do is focus on your ability to be present. Focus on your ability to remain calm. One of the things we see in our research is way too many times, someone will say, when we ask a question about when times get tough, my boss is at their best, or my manager's at the best, or my coach is at their best. And how they answer that question is very telling. And those people that score really low in terms of just their overall quality as a coach, that question is never answered in a good manner. So when times are tough, when they say, no, my boss isn't at their best when times are tough, that's a great indicator they're not a great coach. So, and the thing is, we can control all that if we focus on ourselves. And I think there's a lot of things people can do and should do that they don't do, meditation being one. I think journaling is another great way. These are all things that I do and use, doing daily gratitudes. Those are all things we can do ourselves to become a great coach. And I know people are thinking, well, are you kidding me? That helps. It does. It's not everything, but it's so much of everything. Begins with ourselves. Number two is really simple. I see this all the time, and it's not just, I see it in business, but I also see it in the world of sport. Ask questions. We think because we're in a coaching or leadership role that we need to have all the answers, and you don't. You need to ask the best questions, not to have the best response. And whether I am a coach, providing feedback to an outside hitter on a volleyball team or a gymnast who's on the balance beam, or whether I'm a coach to a group of salespeople, or I'm an executive vice president of sales or the EVP of operations, man, ask the questions. That does multiple things. Number one is one of the things you see in top performers, they're great at self-diagnosing. Number two, it allows, when people self-diagnose and they come up with a solution themselves neurologically, it makes it stick more, which that change, that evolution happens more frequently and more effectively. And third, you're tackling the power of the collective. I am not, first of all, I'm not the smartest guy in our company anyway, or the smartest person in our company anyway. But if I ask the best questions, I can tap into the collective wisdom of everybody by asking the right question. So number one, focus on yourself. And number two, ask powerful questions.
Love it. Love it. I think the other benefit of asking powerful questions, honestly, is that even if you have the answer or you think you have the answer, you're much better off asking the question so that the person can come up with the answer, right? Because more than likely, I mean, they're closer. I'll give you one thing that just kind of came to my mind is like I was coaching someone at one point who wasn't getting along with another person. And so I knew in my own mind, say, okay, listen, I got to tell this person that you're kind of like a bull in a china shop and you just mow through this, over these people or whatever and run over people. And so, but I didn't do that as a coach. I asked him a question. I said, listen, do you use the same communication style with everybody? He's like, yeah, sure. What you see is what you get. I'm like, okay, so does that style actually work with so-and-so? Does that work for you? He's like, no. I'm like, is there something you could do differently? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, no, really, think about it. And before you know it, in like 3 minutes flat, he came up with the answer that he came up with, right? Instead of Amir saying, listen, you need to tone down your communication, because that would have been a lay on. So I totally get what you're saying as far as the power of questions, because A, I may not have the answer anyway, even if I think I do as a coach. And B, when you come up with it, when I ask you the question, you own it. Then it's your answer.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, and that's a great example, Amir. That person is probably 7 times more likely, I think is the statistic I heard, 7 times more likely to act on it since they came up with it. They feel they came up with it and not you.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and I also love your other point around just really focusing on yourself. I think many times we are distracted as coaches and leaders because we are making whatever is happening mean something about us. And all of a sudden I'm in my own head about me, and I cannot be a great coach to the person that I'm coaching. So if I'm more self-aware, and if I'm journaling and meditating or using whatever method works for me to kind of really be at peace and not make everything mean something about me and get discombobulated, then I am more likely to be a great coach. So really excellent advice here, Bill. Thank you so much. Bill, you've given us a lot to think about here, and I know there's a lot more in your book, on your website, your TED Talk, and all of that. So we'll put the right links in the notes. But if you don't mind, just tell our listeners what is the best way to get a hold of you and find out more about what you do.
Well, thank you for that opportunity, Amir. People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm active there. They'll find me on Instagram. They will find me on Twitter. From a company perspective, the Excel Institute is our company's name, and that's ECSELL, excelinstitute.com, where we work with leaders and coaches from around the globe. Now, we started Excel Sports and Excel Education as well, doing the same thing, helping coaches and teachers understand the impact they're having on their students or student athletes. BillEckstrom.com is a personal website that my daughter helped create, like your daughter helped you, was one of my, I kind of put that, I don't need that, I don't want that, she's that person in my life that creates discomfort, makes me do things I don't want to do.
Awesome. Mine
so
is
that's
too.
Another place.
Fantastic. We are both very fortunate to have such daughters who push us to that next level. So
yes, we are.
So I really appreciate it, Bill. Thanks so much for your time and the wisdom you've shared with us. Really, I wish you the best. You're doing some great work.
Thank you, Amir. It's been an honor. You take care, my friend.
You've been listening to the Transformative Leader podcast with Amir Ganad. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, would love to hear from you. Leave a comment, rating, or review wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to share the show with others who would benefit from our content. Don't forget to visit our website at theganadgroup.com to learn more about the ways in which we guide leaders in creating extraordinary cultures that deliver breakthrough results and unprecedented fulfillment. While you're there, you can download our free ebook and audio series on making your culture transformation stick at theganadgroup.com/culture-ebook. As always, feel free to drop me a line at amir@theganadgroup.com and connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Until next time, may you boldly declare, courageously pursue, and abundantly achieve the extraordinary.